this is a chair that Garrett commissioned of mulberry wood. Supposedly, from the wood of a mulberry tree that Shakespeare himself had planted in his backyard in Stratford. And this was the beginning of a sort of cottage industry of Shakespeare memorabilia. Washington Irving in the early 1800s commented that if you took all the mulberry wood souvenirs, tea chests, and all sorts of boxes and knickknacks made of this tree, you could build a warship. And that was before, and this is an ad I found at the Rare Books Library at Harvard, just a single piece of paper in an envelope. Advertising mulberry wood in 1816 in Stratford. Thomas Gibbs has by him testimonials which will indubitably prove that the wood he now offers for sale is part of the tree planted by the hand of the immortal bard. And people were making fun of this 40, 50 years before this, and they were still selling this wood, a little magical tree. So it gives you an idea of what was going on. This is a romanticized painting of Shakespeare's birthplace in Stratford. This was the first stop for any tourist to come to Stratford, even though none of this stuff was original. If you go to Stratford today, all the furniture was acquired later because Shakespeare didn't leave behind anything. And Samuel Ireland and his son, William Henry, went to Stratford. Cookie, when is the cook?
I can't tell if you're looking or not.
Samuel Ireland and his son, William Henry, went to Stratford in 1793, supposedly because Samuel was working on a travel book about Warwickshire, and specifically Stratford. But really, he was looking for artifacts. He was hoping to find overlooked valuables from Shakespeare's lifetime. So lots of other people hadn't already combed the town. And at one point, somebody said, "Oh, I've heard that some of his papers from one of the houses he lived in, when he moved out of town, the Clopton House, which is this mansion on the outskirts of town." So he rushed over there with his son, who wrote about this later. And the owner said, "Oh, you should have come to me sooner. 2 weeks ago it was. I cleared out an attic room for some partridges, and I burned up a bunch of papers in this fireplace right here. And in fact, I think I saw Shakespeare's name on some." And then he called his wife in and said, "Isn't that right, my dear?" She said, "Yes, and you will recall, I told you shouldn't burn those up. They might be of value." And so Samuel was going nuts, and he was running around the house with a lantern looking for everything, for more papers, just found partridges. And I think this is an example of something where, for his son to write about this way indicates that he understood how foolish his father was being, although he would never come out and say that. William Henry was a pretty savvy kid. He was probably 16, 17, and he could see how gullible his father was, and I think he took note of this. This is their neighborhood, what was then the West End. This is the Strand, which was the main shopping street. This is Norfolk Street. It is right there. Somerset House is where both the Royal Society and the Society of Antiquarians met. It was a new palace. Samuel really wanted to be invited to join, to be nominated to be a member, but they blackballed him. They wouldn't accept him because he just wasn't the right kind of gentleman somehow. He found his son, William Henry, a job after William Henry had failed in school. He had been a terrible student. One headmaster sent his father a note saying, "You're wasting your money paying tuition. Your son is so stupid, he's a disgrace to the school." And he basically flunked out of 3 schools and ended up as an unpaid clerk in New Inn, which was a campus-like enclave, built at the same time as Harvard's and Princeton's first buildings. Surrounding it were alleys where there were all these curiosity shops and used bookstalls and slaughterhouses and really dark, narrow alleys. But here it was sort of a respite. It was a very quiet place, mostly used by lawyers. And here, William Henry his father paid his lawyer friend to take his son on. The lawyer didn't really have much incentive to be teaching the boy anything, so he was never even around. The boy was alone in the lawyer's chambers, place surrounded by, filled with old documents from the 1400s in some cases. Nobody was watching him. And he really wanted to find his father something written by Shakespeare. He started by looking in his own boss's office and didn't find anything. And then he started looking in neighborhood shops. This is Wych Street, which is as seen from the entrance to New Inn. That's where the camera is. This was taken in 1880. But these buildings date from Shakespeare's lifetime, early 1600s. Right after this, the neighborhood was knocked down. That's St. Clement Dane in the background, which is the church whose chimes at midnight, Falstaff and Justice Swallow heard in Henry IV. This must have been taken early in the morning. Normally this would be really crowded, filled with shops. And William Henry, like his father, knew the shops and was constantly looking for rarities. And he would actually come home with little pamphlets. Sometimes friends of his father would ask him for things. And William Henry was, like his father, really interested in the past. He practiced writing in old-fashioned handwriting. This is the secretary hand, which was the handwriting that would be taught to scribes and clerks in the 1500s. So we presume maybe Shakespeare wrote this way. But of course, no one's seen Shakespeare's handwriting, so we don't know. And when he turned to forgery, it's kind of an understandable thing. He wanted to please his father. His father would say, if I could just get a scrap signed by Shakespeare, I could give away all my stuff, or half of it. But William Henry had a role model in Thomas Chatterton, who had died just before he was born, in 1770. Chatterton was a young article clerk also, an unpaid lawyer's apprentice in Bristol, who had nothing to do, and he began forging old poetry on parchment he found in the church next door. And in old-fashioned language, old-fashioned handwriting, and people who saw these manuscripts were amazed and loved it, and an earl offered to get it published, but Chatterton wanted to go to London and make his way as a writer under his own name. He tried and failed. Nobody was interested in Thomas Chatterton's writing. So at the age of 17, he drank arsenic and died. This is a very romanticized picture of his death in his attic room in London. But he became a sort of the archetypal starving poet, romanticized by Coleridge and Wordsworth, and Keats all wrote poems about him. And William Henry Ireland also was he envied Chatterton's fate. The first thing that William Henry forged was a deed, which basically copied from a deed in his office. But he forged Shakespeare's signature above a wax seal. And this is not obviously a forgery. This is an engraving made later representing what the forgery looked like. The actual forgery had wax seals dangling on parchment strips looped through slots in the main body of the deed. And this signature of a man named Fraser used his left hand to make it, so he wouldn't let his own handwriting be detected. It's kind of strange. It looks like a 2-year-old did it. But his father believed it when he passed it to his father one evening, and accepted it as genuine, as did his friends. But instead of being delighted, his father was pretty chilly anyway. His main reaction was, where did you find this? Because wherever you found it, there must be more stuff from Shakespeare's life. The boy said he found it in an old oak chest in the mansion of an anonymous gentleman of mine we call Mr. H. And he said Mr. H did not want Shakespearean cultists laying siege to his mansion, looking for more souvenirs, so he wanted to stay anonymous. And because of the good reception, he started, moving along and trying more daring things. His father was really hassling him, saying, there's a trunk full of papers. Why are you delivering them one page at a time? All he was doing because he was working as fast as he could to write a paper as good as his father. So he hit on the idea of sort of, what do you call it, reverse engineering things. So this is a page of King Lear. He found a really early edition of King Lear that his father happened to have just bought, an early sort of paperback, way before the first folio. And he transcribed it in his version of the secretary hand. And he changed things as he went. So in King Lear, there's this scene where the fool makes a lot of sort of vulgar jokes, or Kent goes on a long tear where he's using really coarse insults against Oswald. He left that stuff out. And when people saw this, they thought, well, at last, we're seeing what Shakespeare really wrote. Instead of this sort of bad taste he often displayed, we're seeing the real gentleman, the real Shakespeare, unsullied by inept editors and conniving printers who are just trying to please the public with their gross stuff. And it's sort of like that statue of Shakespeare. One reason people believe the forgeries is the boy was creating the Shakespeare that people wanted to believe. This is a love letter. Again, this is not the original, this is an engraving. The original had an actual lock of hair from Shakespeare that he was giving to Anne Hathaway. And again, people always wondered, well, what was Shakespeare's relationship to his wife? He left her the second best bed in his will, which doesn't sound very affectionate. And people always apologize for that today. No, the second best bed, that was a good bed. I don't think so. And he lived in London, she lived in Stratford. When they got married, she was about 6 months pregnant. It doesn't sound like a marriage that should sound like a shotgun wedding. So William Henry corrected this by writing this love letter and then a love poem that I think Don handed out to everybody. It begins, is there in heaven aught more rare than thou, sweet nymph of native blonde hair? It's kind of sing-song. But people wanted to believe it because now here's the love story that inspired the man who created Romeo and Juliet. And Ophelia, Desdemona, all these stories that everybody knows. Finally, William Henry went whole hog, decided to forge a complete play. He never published a poem before. I'm not sure if he's written many poems, but he went ahead and wrote an original play. And this is a version he wrote much later and he published. So the original has disappeared, all of them have. But people who saw this were really delighted. And I have to really emphasize that it was astonishing to people that the papers had disappeared. It meant that everybody had thrown out all those papers Shakespeare had written on. And he must have written a lot. He must have written first drafts. He must have had lots of poems. And for people to have thrown out Shakespeare's papers meant that they didn't recognize his unique genius. They certainly couldn't have seen him as a deity. And people were confused. They thought somebody must have put the papers away for safekeeping and forgotten where they are. They're in somebody's country manor. And so when the boy said, look what I found, their reaction wasn't to be astonished. It was, well, it's about time. We've been looking for this.